River Volta, a major river in Ghana, routes its course through the country from the north to the south on an approximately 61,000 square mile journey. The river takes its source from Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, and to a lesser extent Côte d'Ivoire and Mali. In 1915, a gorge down south of the River Volta was discovered to offer a potential for a hydroelectric dam by geologist Sir Albert Ernest Kitson. The realization of the concept for the dam following its discovery went through many challenges and threats. Thankfully, after many years of research and debates on its viability, in 1961, the hope for its realization was brought to life by the elected president of independent Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who adopted the Volta River hydropower project to grandly represent the beginning of Ghana's new and growing economy. After many further extensive research and reports ordered by Dr. Nkrumah on the Volta River project, the approved plan was the construction of a dam at Agena, whose resulting lake formation behind the dam would be the largest man-made lake in the world. The lake, aside offering electricity, was to bring with it many benefits such as large-scale agriculture, including fish farming, river transport and tourism. Unfortunately, the lake when formed would displace 740 villages and about 80,000 people along with their livelihoods. With perseverance and an attitude that would overcome every adversity, the project was seen to completion. And today, the Akosombo Dam is one of the most important landmarks and self-sustained projects in the history of Ghana.
Because the dam is not simply just a dam for producing power. It represents for us a very important symbol of visioning and the faith in the Ghanaian talent. We can do it.
To share this history, we will meet to Mr. Kobla Kalichi, a distinguished government agent who got involved in the dam project in 1961 when VRA was formed. Mr. Louis Kaisley Hayford, one of the first Ghanaian engineers recruited to work on the engineering aspect of the dam during construction. Nana Afrakomo, the second Queen Mother of Akwamu, who witnessed the negotiations between government and the communities that was to be affected by the dam construction. We will also meet some of the technical staff who worked at VRA and construction workers involved in the project. Bauxite relies on large volume of power for its conversion into alumina. To make local processing of the bauxite cost-effective, abundant supply of cheap electricity was key. It was for this reason that on April the 24th, 1915, Kitson, who was engaged on a rapid canoe voyage down the Volta as part of a countrywide survey, on entering the narrow gorge below Agena, recorded the location as an ideal place for a dam. The story of a hydroelectric dam in the Gold Coast itself begins in 1949, when the Gold Coast government commissioned a British firm of consulting engineers, Sir William Halcrow and Partners, to examine a proposed power scheme and report on the wider aspects of the development of the Volta River Basin in respect of health, navigation and communications. The resulting report was published in 1951.
They said a smelter should be built to buy the electricity. That was a necessity. And then they said the port should be established at Tema instead of at Ada for more economic reasons. They shifted the bauxite aluminium production to Tema. This was accepted by the Gold Coast government, And so they proceeded immediately to build Tema. This whole package was estimated at £144 million, but it was to be financed partly by the Gold Coast government up to about 30%, and then the British government about 38%, and then the aluminium interests about 32%.
To win the support of the Gold Coast people and the international communities on the Volta River project, a special mobile exhibition was mounted for a period of 2 years.
I think most people couldn't figure out what the whole thing was all about, except that they were going to get electricity. But none of them, I think, could picture, including myself. I hadn't seen a rock-filled dam that size before in my life.
In 1951, the Volta River Project exhibition was brought to our school in Oda, and I was there. I went round, and it generated interest in me, even though I didn't understand what it was about.
In 1953, a Volta River Preparatory Commission was established. Even though the Commission found the project economically feasible and technically sound, the proposed budget of £230 million sterling required to cover the cost of the dam and power station installation at Agena, the opening up of the bauxite mines, and a complete plant for producing aluminium from bauxite at Pong looked impossible to raise.
It made the British government and the aluminium companies no longer that much interested.
And of course, Akosombo was his passion. You see, his background was having lived in the United States for a number of years, apart from studying there. He had the exposure, and he had visited some of these sites in the US, and he knew what it was all about. This is why when he came back, he had this passion. But obviously, if you didn't have cheap electricity to distribute, to industries and so on, you couldn't grow the country.
The ball to be played on all occasions.
Ghana, as a young and independent country, could not raise the entire amount from its own national purse.
What is important for you to know is that Ghana undertook to finance 50% of the cost of Akosombo from its own budgetary resources.
In 1958, Dr. Nkrumah, on an official visit to the United States of America, used the opportunity to discuss the importance of the project with President Eisenhower. By the end of Dr. Nkrumah's visit, a US firm of consulting engineers, the Henry J. Kaiser Company, had been signed by Ghana and the United States to undertake reassessment of the engineering aspect of the project and cost. In March 1959, 7 months after Dr. Nkrumah's visit to the USA, Kaiser Consultants submitted their recommendations. A hydroelectric dam to be constructed at the gorge below Agena as recommended by Kitson. 2 other hydro dams could be constructed in Akose and Bui, all on the Volta River. Aluminium smelter to be sited at Tema instead of Pong due to the construction of the harbour on Tema. Abandon the proposal to use the local bauxite and import alumina until revenue from the industry made it possible to mine and refine the local bauxite into alumina. Install a 500-mile network transmission line covering the whole of southern Ghana. A business plan which government was sure would yield a good return on investment for any investor was drawn up as part of the bid.
You needed a very big consumer of that electricity, you see. So this was why they entered into negotiations with Kaisers for the aluminium smelter Valco. And the initial power agreement, again, that is stuff that Mr. Kalitsi was involved with in those days. They negotiated like crazy to get the cheapest price, because without them the thing wouldn't happen. They enabled it, they made it happen.
The shareholders of Valco invested $12 million. Then the shareholders took loans of $20 million. And then the Exim Bank gave them a loan of $96 million, altogether making $128 million. And this was how it was done.
In his vision to ensure the Volta River project was founded on a strong foundation and with the much-needed authority to operate without interference, Prime Minister Nkrumah in April 1961 moved Parliament to pass the Volta River Development Act, establishing Volta River Authority, VRA, as a statutory corporation. VRA's mandate was to plan and execute the development of the Volta River, oversee the construction and operation of the dam, power station and transmission system, be responsible for the 3,275 square mile lake behind the dam and develop the lake for fishing, transport and communication, as well as providing health and welfare services to the people along the lake.
Our first job was to complete arrangements for mobilizing the funds, getting the documents signed and all that. And then making arrangements for setting up the management structure of the institution, recruiting the engineers, financiers, all the other people who would work on the project.
With the location of the dam established and funding secured, it was time to start the construction process. VRA put out tenders worldwide seeking experienced contractors who would undertake the construction work.
So many bids were brought in, examined, and eventually Impregilo, which is a company composed of Imprese Girola Lodigiani, won the contract.
Interestingly enough, the Americans were appointed, Kaiser Engineers, as the consultants. So they actually did the design of the whole project. All the early investigation, the geological work and so on was done by them with the assistance of the Geological Surveys Department in Accra. And they did all the design and then supervised the construction.
Once the contract had been awarded, the next task was to recruit the workforce who would assist with the construction. Fortunately, at the time, there was a good supply of quality workforce.
The workers needed at that time were laborers, drivers and caterpillar operators. Most of these people had previously worked on the Tema Harbour project.
We knew that it would open the gates for a major development. So I would say that Ghanaian workers played their role very well.
The magnitude of the project, along with its prestige, also excited the locals within the surrounding communities who lobbied for a share of the manual workforce being recruited at the time. By the time construction had commenced, the Akosombo town had been fairly developed with residential facilities for the different levels of workforce working on the site at the time.
They built a small township at the top of the hill, which was reserved exclusively for the consultants.
And Impregilo people were staying at the top. That's why we get community 1 and 2. The top is 1, down here 2.
So you had, all these Americans. There were a few non-white people amongst them. There were 1 or 2 from Brazil and so on, who were all living on the site. And then, of course, the rest of it, which was occupied by the contractor, the Italians, up at the top there. And, those of us who went there in the early days to do with resettlement, we had to organize the township. Akosombo township had to be organized.
With the huge Italian presence on the construction site, it was not surprising to have had Cardinal Giovanni Montini, who later became Pope Paul VI, visiting Akosombo in 1962 to open the first major monument for the town, the St. Barbara Catholic Church. The Cardinal was quoted as saying during his visit that the Volta River project was a monument of nations working together, a symbol of the brotherhood of nations, a sign of peace and progress.
At the initial stages, they were facing some challenges, and so the Italian contractors who came, they thought it wise to invite their Archbishop from Milan to come and pray for them so that those challenges will be overcome. So because the Cardinal was coming, they hurriedly constructed this beautiful edifice just in a matter of 21 days. So he came in August 1962, said a prayer at the dam, and then dedicated this church also in that same period. Thought it wise to position the church in such a way that it will face the dam perpendicularly. It's like God looking over the dam. Yeah, so I think, and if you trace the crucifix, the cross in front of the chapel, right down to the dam, it will hit it perpendicularly. So it has some spiritual significance, spiritual importance.
On the 23rd of January 1962, Osajafo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, President of the Republic of Ghana and the Chairman of the Volta River Authority, broke ground to mark the official commencement of the construction of the Akosombo hydroelectric dam. The lake that would form behind the dam was to cover 8,482 square kilometers and become the largest man-made lake in the world. The formation of this lake unfortunately was estimated to submerge 740 villages and displace about 80,000 people. VRA had anticipated these effects and had taken steps to find ways of minimizing the disruptive effect on these communities.
One of the biggest concerns was the resettlement program, because once the dam was built and we started to impound water, the people who lived along the banks of the river had to be resettled. And they had to be counted. We had to look for areas where we were going to resettle them. The resettlement towns had to be designed.
In 1963, I was assigned responsibility for resettlement of the people to be flooded. So that meant carrying out surveys, identifying those to be flooded, making plans. This I did. I set up a resettlement organization.
The task of preparing the communities that were to be displaced and the selection of a suitable new location to move them to was a tough job, which required the involvement of the leaders of the local communities, social workers, as well as Volta River Authority, with the support of the government.
I was a child then when the construction started. My uncle was Nana Kwafo Okotole II. I understood everything that was going on. After consulting him, he gave them the land for the construction. He spoke to the people about how it's going to bring work and prosperity to the area. I remember very well at that time they used a canoe to cross the river to Agina to have dialogue with them about the impending flooding of the lands at Agina, Apaso and Pese.
Now these people incidentally were occupying a vast area, 8,500 square kilometers, The villages were about, if my memory serves me right, about 738 or so villages, and the number was about 80,000. Today you can be mentioning these numbers, but it was a blank. And we had to ferret out all these, find out where the people were, what they were doing, what facilities they had.
And so it became necessary to plan to move those people. And I think the engineer at that time and the government, they had the foresight to work out a very strong and very effective rehabilitation program. And this program involved the Air Force in the sense that we had to fly items, supplies to airstrips that were built alongside the lake that was forming to the east of the lake.
We found that there just wasn't time. So we decided, we managed to identify sites in consultation with the people. 52 sites were eventually agreed on.
We cleared the land for people to build the houses for the settlers and also farms. That is our main work.
Basically, these were small communities and villages that had to be brought together. One had to look at the social background to see whether they would work together. The chieftaincy issues came in, how they were going to survive, farms, how you gave them farms, allocated farm area for them.
Because we are farmers, the VRA acquired land around the village so that they can continue with their livelihood as before.
In 1962-63, when they actually came, the delegation, they say they were from VRA, but because of the Volta Lake, they are constructing a dam for Ghana, and as such, our lands will be affected. So they will automatically evacuate us from where we were staying. So they have come to make service. First, the first thing they did was numbering of our houses.
Having agreed with the people on the sites, we decided that we'd give the people the beginnings of houses in beginnings of towns.
So we gave everybody who was affected a kind of what we call in the VRA a nuclear house, to make sure that at least nobody was flooded out.
Back at the construction site, work was progressing steadily. Equipment and machinery for the construction work had been sourced from across the world, using the best equipment and technology available at the time.
Most of the mechanical equipment came from Japan because it was put on international tender. The Japanese won the contract. The electrical equipment came from the United States, General Electric.
The Canadian instructors went in for people who were working, especially those of us who were working with electricity department. We have some technical background.
I got involved, in the initial stages with the engineering side of the dam itself. The contract documents, all the drawings, organizing these in a proper manner so that they could be accessed. And what happened was that Dr. Nkrumah appointed Ontario Hydro to give us the initial staff to cover the construction period, and then later on also the actual commissioning and running of the plant. And one of the, apart from them supervising as Volta River Authority, whilst the consultant was there, the construction of the dam, they had to set up all these new departments. So they were mainly people who were taken from Ontario Hydro in Canada, from Toronto.
We were having about 37 machines. The machine can crush the tree down and walk on it, and you find the tree no more.
I would say that our people responded very well. I suspect that perhaps we were paid a little more than other people in the country. In other words, the wage levels were also such as to make VRA a popular place. Everybody wanted to come to VRA.
They may keep you in a work site for almost maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You don't come home. You work day and night, day and night.
Intrigiro employed Ghanaians mostly because the operators, when they mentioned operators' quarters, operators were staying there. Operators who drive caterpillars, graders, they were staying at operators' quarters. All Ghanaians.
Our training was classroom, in the evenings, and on the job during the day.
But I must say that Ghanaians worked extremely hard. Today, people work overtime and they expect to be paid. During construction, whether at Akosombo or on the resettlement front, people just worked for as long as they had a job to do. No one asked questions about overtimes and whatnot. We didn't have any of such problems. Today, you can't move one step without people asking you to pay them for it.
So, that aspect of working with the contractor was very useful. Yes, we saw everything being installed and we took part.
The Volta River hydroelectric dam at Akosombo was a gravity rockfill type. The reason for this type of dam was a practical one, as the materials were readily available. The rocks in the Akosombo Gorge were very hard and could be broken into workable boulders. Additionally, there was plenty of lighter rocky material for compacting purposes and unlimited quantity of river sand and adequate deposits of good clay for the impervious dam core.
The gorge, where the dam went across, was quite wide. So the American design team decided that they had to build what's called a rockfill dam. And essentially what it meant was that you had rocks downstream and upstream, and in the middle you had compacted soil, I'm using, to make it easy, laterite, as it was called, which was the core, which prevented the water from, flowing through the dam. And it was one of the largest rockfill dams being built in the world at that time. You see, when you start, you've got to divert the river, so you get access to the bed rock where you start the dam. So the river was diverted through a tunnel, which is on the east side of the east side of the dam, and the water was diverted through there, and then the spillways, and then the dam, was constructed, including what we call the coffer dam, because we had this area there too, which was slightly lower than the highest level of the lake. So all this started in around late '62, really got into high gear late 63, 64.
The dam is a 660 metres long and 114 metres high rock-filled embankment. It has a base width of 366 metres and a structural volume of 7,900,000 metric cube. The reservoir created by the dam, Lake Volta, has a capacity of 148 cubic kilometres and a surface area of 8,502 kilometres squared. The lake is 400 kilometres long. Maximum lake depth is 84.73 metres and minimum is 73.15 metres. An inconvenient valley just half a mile away from the main dam, which would act as a permanent overflow from the lake, had to be blocked. A second dam of similar design, known as the Saddle Dam, was therefore built simultaneously to check the expected overflow. The Saddle Dam measured 1,200 feet in length, 500 feet at its widest, and 120 feet high. On the east side of the dam are two adjacent spillways that can discharge approximately 34,000 cubic meters of water. Each spillway contains 6 11.5 meters wide and 13.7 meters tall steel floodgates.
I was part of the people that went under the dam. When they finished the scaffolding, we went under the river to wash the riverbed. They hung buckets on the road from either side of the hills, which we used in fetching water from the riverbed. When we finished drawing the water, we noticed a leakage, so we made small holes in the riverbed and fixed 2 water pump machines to drain the water out.
But when they fetch clay and water from marine, we have very strong powered water hose. We blow it several times to make clean before they allow you to come and pour it down. So eventually you saw that the work was progressing little by little. When they put the gravels and the sand and then clay, they covered the first footing with tarpaulin throughout and put in heavy machines for about 1 week. By that time they were preparing for the materials. The sand, the materials, the clay and the rocks were fetched from marine, where you see when you are getting into the differences.
The dam's power plant contains 6 170 megawatt Francis turbines. Each turbine is supplied with water via a 112 to 116 meters long and 7.2 meters diameter penstock with a maximum of 68.8 meters of hydraulic head afforded. The process to generate electricity at the powerhouse was designed for water to be allowed to fall at a height of about 60 meters onto the turbine at considerable speed through the penstocks. The speed of the falling water is made to drive the turbine, and the turbine in turn drives the magnet in the generator, since they are coupled. The movement of the magnet relative to the stationary conductors in the generator causes electricity to be produced at the voltage of 14.4 kilovolts. The electricity is then transformed to a higher voltage of 161 kilovolts by the use of a power transformer and transported through cables throughout Ghana.
In the case of Akosombo, the construction was such that the whole thing was completed ahead of schedule. This enabled us to save a substantial amount of money, which we then invested later in the expansion of Akosombo from 4 units to 6 units.
The credibility factor, as far as the smelter was concerned, was very questionable. They didn't think we could run that plant. I remember some people who would come there and say, there's no way you Ghanaians can run this plant. It's too big for you. You just don't have the experience. You've got to have the white guys there, you know, virtually forever.
As with every project of such scale, regardless of the strict health and safety precautions put in place to prevent any fatalities, there are bound to be some form of incidents. Unfortunately, the Volta River project was no different.
We had a very bad explosion there, which killed a lot of people.
Boom. But then many people were working.
If you go to the Catholic church up on the hill, you'll see all the names.
On the 15th of February, there was a disaster just about the 15th February 1966. That was about the time they had almost completed the dam and they were about to commission it. There was an accident, there was a blast, and about 10 people died on that day.
It was caused by leakage of methane gas, which, for some reason hadn't been detected. And I think there was some welding work which ignited a spark, and we had this huge explosion.
The resilience and hard work of the construction workers, consultants and VRA, with the strong support from government, bore fruits on the 22nd of January 1966. 2 years ahead of schedule, the Akosombo hydroelectric project was ready to be commissioned. The opening ceremony attracted a great number of high-profile personalities from across the world.
Basically, we'd commissioned Unit 1. It was number 3 unit, the first unit, which was supplying electricity. We hadn't started supplying Valco because Valco wasn't complete at that time. But it was supplying Tema and Accra. And September, October, they started planning to have it inaugurated officially in February. And as usual, like with all these inauguration ceremonies, we brought all the important people there, including Nkrumah himself, and all the speeches and so on. We went through all that. It was a typical inauguration ceremony. And the plant was officially declared finished. We did some tests before, obviously, but when it came to actually demonstrating that we'd had the first unit was actually generating electricity, we took Nkrumah to Akosombo. And those guys there, including myself, were with him when we showed him how to switch on the first unit. So then he switched it on and actually saw the electricity flow. So he knew that, we'd got to that stage.
"50 years and beyond since the establishment of VRA, the authority is poised to improve on its mandate to ensure cheap form of energy supply for Ghana.
For VRA, we are also in the process of adding on a lot of generation. I must say government itself has assisted to build what we call the Takrady 3, it's a 132 megawatt plant, Takrady 3 power plant. Even though the sector, the energy sector has been reformed to allow IPPs in independent power producers we as VRA, which is a government institution, we are not waiting for the IPPs to come, because if they don't come, the country is in trouble. So we are behaving as if they are not coming. If they come and complement what we are doing. But if they don't come, we don't want our people, we don't want development to suffer in this country, and that is what we've been doing.
Looking back, a number of proposals laid out during the planning of the Volta River project have not been fully achieved, and some that were implemented also abandoned after years of neglect. The resettlement exercise also left an ongoing dispute between VRA and the resettled communities on receipt of compensations.
The country has not been able to implement a serious irrigation. There are small bits of irrigation on the Accra Plains. The water transport, that a port was built at Akosombo and at Bwepe and at Yape. Volta Lake Transport Company has been established. Bauxite had not been developed like was envisaged because we missed the boat from the beginning. The plans changed the moment Nkrumah accepted the strategy of VRA supplying power to VACO, and that he had expectation that within about 10 years they will be able to build an alumina plant. Well, we never built an alumina plant.
Kwame Nkrumah envisaged many great things coming out of the development of the lake, and I would agree that we have not reached that potential by any means. What we're doing today is to try and realize that potential, not by doing it ourselves, especially in this era of power sector reform, but by looking for private sector partners who have the expertise and skills, whether it's in farming, whether it's in lake transport, whether it's in tourism, to really take those assets and develop them to their full potential.
That the VRA is positioned to play a very important role in the energy picture, not only in Ghana, but also in West Africa, because we have the personnel, we have the history, the experience to manage a high-class energy production facility. All that is required now is for us to provide the policy environment within which such a strategic enterprise can serve not only Ghana, but the sub-region, and it can be done.
What's really amazing is that this project was conceived 50 years ago, and today the project is still providing for over 60% of the country's needs. That's extraordinary. You know, thinking out another 50 years, it's hard to think of any project that would meet half the country's needs 50 years from now. So it's very relevant to this country's economy and the people. But if we were to do a good job as a country, what that means is that we would build on what we have today. We would grow even further. We would bring more investments into all aspects of the economy, and the current supply of electricity would not be enough. So we must find new sources of power, whether that's thermal-fired power, whether that's hydropower, whether that's wind and solar. And these are the things that VRA is doing now to build on what we have.
Nevertheless, Ghana and the Volta River Authority can still pride themselves for maintaining to date in pristine shape this national asset, the Akosombo Hydroelectric Dam. Thanks to the professional and dedicated team whose hard work has enabled the authority to attain this success. For VRA, this is not the end, but to move in time with technology to guarantee a better future for all Ghanaians in the provision of stable power supply.